Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the From Adversity to Abundance podcast. I am your host, Jamie Bateman, and I am pumped today. Today we have with us Mr. Seth Bradley. Seth is the managing partner of Law Capital Partners. Seth, how are you doing today?
Doing great, brother. Good to see you, man. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. I know we got to spend some time together a few weeks back in the British Virgin Islands, which
Yeah,
was
not a
a
bad place to
blast.
be. Yeah,
No,
yeah.
it was awesome. For the listener who has no idea what we're talking about, Seth was a one of the keynote speakers at a mastermind group that we went to and used as an excuse. We used the mastermind as an excuse to enjoy Scrub Island, which was fantastic. So I got to know you a little bit on that trip, which was awesome. So, but for the listener who is completely unfamiliar with you, Seth, who are you and what are you up to today?
Yeah, I mean, today I'm a securities attorney by trade, a real estate investor. We're doing, well, I should say we were doing. So, the commercial real estate market has slowed quite a bit, but just to kind of put it in context, I closed on 14 deals last year, 14 commercial deals that were all syndications or funds where I was a general partner on. And then, my background is in big law. So I worked in big law for about 6 years and then started my own law firm as a real estate and securities attorney.
And I mean, you said it very clearly, but just to reiterate, those are not 14 deals that you put together as the SEC attorney, as the securities attorney, I should say, but as the operator, as a general partner or a general partner. So you're actively involved in commercial real estate investing.
That's right.
Which
That's right. Yeah.
which is
And these are large deals. I mean, anywhere from, smallest was kind of small, like $2 million, upwards of a $76 million Class A apartment building in Nashville. I mean, they're,
wow,
all ranges here. Yeah.
wow, that's awesome. Well, I know I learned a ton when you were speaking a few weeks ago, and I know we're going to learn a ton today about real estate and funds and things like that. But let's jump back into more of your personal story, and before we get to what you're up to today in depth, let's talk about some of the adversity you've been through. I know you mentioned to me before we hit record some about your background, but start us off. Where would you like to start, Seth?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can start it off at year zero. I'm a Korean adoptee. I was adopted when I was 3 months old. I was born in South Korea, but then adopted when I was 3 months old and adopted by a couple of wonderful people in West Virginia, in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia. I don't know if you're watching video or audio right now, but I don't look like I belong in West Virginia. We'll just put it that way. So when I got to San Diego, eventually people were like, "Oh, you're from here, right?" Whenever they meet people, I'm like, "No, I'm from West Virginia," and they're like, "Oh, okay."
that's
And,
that's not what I would have guessed, right? Yeah,
yeah,
I'm in Maryland, and my wife and kids and we just did a short trip a few months ago to West Virginia, and I don't remember seeing too many people who look like you, if I'm being honest. Um, so okay, so you at 3 months old moved to West Virginia, right?
Yep, 3 months old, was adopted by a couple of great people in West Virginia. Not the most diverse place. We'll just put it that way. Beautiful place, really nice people for the most part. You know what I mean? And we'll kind of get into that. But, a wonderful place to grow up, really. But there's no diversity there. So I went to a decent sized high school, maybe I think 1,500 kids. I was one of two Asians. I think there were two black guys that literally they brought in from Canada to play on the basketball team, which is crazy. And then there were no Hispanics at all. So I mean, there's like zero diversity, which you can imagine has its challenges when you're growing up as a child. Children just say whatever they want to say. It
Sure.
might have, they might have heard it from their parents, or it might just be, hey, I look different than everybody else, so you got to comment on it. I mean, I can see, those things. So if you're not used to being around diversity, then you're not used to it, and you're going to comment on it, especially when you're young. So, it was definitely a challenge growing up, but I think that unlike some people, I used it as fuel, really, to kind of fuel my success and where I wanted to take my life.
So it sounds like you dealt with a good bit of racism or something along those lines. And then and this is me just, correct me if I'm wrong, but did you, I don't know when you learned that you were adopted, but I imagine that was also a factor, a bit of adversity that you had to overcome. So what I'm getting at is our guests typically, the adversity that we end up talking about is it kind of ends up falling into one or more of three categories. And that's health, financial, or relationship. And so what we've talked about thus far is pretty much relationship, right? And so I guess really what I'm asking is, how about the adopted part of it? Was that a challenge for you as well?
It actually wasn't, to be honest. Like
Okay.
for me personally, it wasn't a challenge because I think, I got lucky in a sense that my parents, my adopted parents are awesome. Like they're such
Hmm.
incredibly good people. Like
Sure.
they were awesome role models. They're white, so they don't look like me. So it's pretty obvious, to begin
Hmm.
with. So I mean, there was
Sure.
no point in trying to like hide it or something. So, but since I can remember, I knew that I was adopted, but it was
Got it.
always reinforced in my head that it doesn't matter. We love you just as if you
Sure.
were a biological son. And I
That's awesome.
remember that from the day that I can start remembering things. I don't know, 3 or 4 years old or whatever. So it was
Got it.
always kind of set in my head that I'm loved and accepted,
Sure.
and it was never, an issue. So I think, sometimes I talk about other Korean adoptees that are having a lot of issues as far
Hmm.
as, belonging, and, they're kind of, in my eyes, complaining because it's just the mindset that I have, but they're like, they're just
Yeah.
not taking accountability for where they're at and how they feel.
Sure.
Um, that's one thing that where I had an advantage. Like maybe they didn't get adopted by, the
Hmm.
the folks that I got adopted by, that's for sure. So,
Sure.
they definitely have a little bit of a harder road than I might have had. But, I was still dealing with the racism and, not looking like everybody else and that sort of thing.
Sure. So before we get to really how your what your mindset was, and how you approach that, the racism, does anything, can you illustrate it a little bit? I mean, not to drill down too far, but just kind of what are we talking about here? Because certainly this is this is a topic that needs, unfortunately, needs addressing, still in our culture. So just give us a little bit more context as to what you were dealing with, maybe in high school or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, dumb stuff, right? Like and it develops because when you're dealing with it when you're a kid, again, I don't like to say racism unless I really like
Hmm.
feel like it's racism. So I like trying to figure out, like, are you kind of ignorant to the subject and you're just
Sure.
kind of, just saying stuff to say stuff, or it's just not, it's different compared
Hmm.
to what you're used to? Or are
Right.
you saying things with malice? Like, are you
Hmm.
meaning it in a bad way and you know exactly what you're doing? To me, there's a difference. A lot of people will say there's not, but for me,
Hmm.
there is a difference. And I think maybe it's because I was around it so much growing up. I had to kind of decipher
Hmm.
that. It's like, okay, am I going to get in a fist fight with every single person that does that? Or am I going to have to say, okay, this guy means this and this guy means that, and I'm going to fight this guy, not this guy? Like,
Sure.
I did get
Gotcha.
in a lot of fights, and when I'm young,
Hmm.
because you had to defend yourself and that sort of thing. But anyway, I mean, when you're a kid, it's just dumb stuff like teasing
Yeah.
people, like pulling your eyes back. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And like,
Sure.
oh, you got a flat face, like
Mm.
stupid stuff like that when you're a kid.
Right.
But then as you get older, it ends up turning into something with, a little bit more, that malice where,
Sure.
people start calling me a chink and things like
Mm.
that.
Gotcha.
That's very offensive to me. So if you
Sure.
drop that word
Absolutely.
to me, um,
We're gonna have
we're
problems.
we're gonna have a problem for sure.
Yeah.
So it just, it really depends on, what stage of life, really.
No, I appreciate you talking about that a little bit. I know it's probably not the most what you it's the most fun thing to talk about. It's not why you wanted to come on the show, but it does help us, just realize the reality of what was going on. So you had a loving environment, at home. Your parents were very supportive and accepting of you, and so that helped set you up for success, it sounds like. But it does sound like you had a mindset shift with regard to how you were going to approach this racism, whether with malice or not, and other adversity that you dealt with. But talk to us about, how or why you decided, you weren't going to play the victim card.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was ever even an option in my head. Like I've just always been accountable and self-sufficient and always wanting to handle things on my own and not having to say, well, I can't do this because of that or because of that person or this person or,
Hmm.
it's just, I think a lot of people use that as an excuse and it doesn't get them anywhere. Whether or not you actually have a legitimate excuse is not really the argument. I
Hmm.
mean, some people have quote unquote privileges that other people don't. That's just life.
Hmm.
You're born with more
Sure.
money, you're born with less money, you're
Yeah.
born, with a dad that's going to be around or not.
Right.
You're born good looking or you're not. Like
Yeah.
everybody's got their
Absolutely.
advantages and disadvantages in this life, but
Right.
to lean on the disadvantages as a crutch is not going to help you. Like it's
No.
just not. It's simply not going to help you.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I couldn't agree more. And it's, I didn't have the exact same experience as you, so I'm not pretending I did, but um life is not fair.
Right.
And it's just not, right? So stop trying to make it fair. And I don't mean, I'm not trying to make some controversial statement about, you know, a political statement or anything like that, but
Yeah.
it doesn't serve you or me as an individual to focus overly on the adversity or the unfairness or the hate maybe that's spewed at you. And so I couldn't agree more. I think it only serves you to not use that as a crutch, not use that as an excuse, not constantly play the victim card, and instead point to what can you do to better your situation. What are your strengths? Who's on your side? So talk to us about that. I mean, how did your life go maybe after high school?
Yeah, I mean, again, just going back to that, I mean, I think you just have to make the most out of what you got, whatever it
Yeah,
is. You know what I mean?
absolutely.
That's really what it comes down to because it's not gonna help you to lean on those those disadvantages if or whatever you want to
Sure.
call it.
That's a great
Um,
lesson. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I went on to school was always really easy for me. So I went on to try to figure out, and I think this is kind of a mindset shift as well. I don't know where we categorize that, but
Hmm.
I grew up in rural West Virginia.
Hmm.
I wasn't exposed to entrepreneurship, wasn't exposed to, real estate investing, anything like that. My dad's a
Hmm.
retired coal miner, my mom's a retired school teacher. It was just kind of like, okay, basically, trading your time for money. What's the best job you can get? And to me,
Hmm.
that was to become a doctor
Hmm.
at the time. So I kind of went down that pathway through college, did all that, got into med school, went to med school for a year, got in my second year, and in my second year, about halfway through, I walked out because I knew it wasn't for me. I just hated
Hmm.
it. I was like, everybody's looking forward to get to like the clinical side, and I'm just like, man, this is just more stuff I know that I don't want to do.
Hmm.
So, I went on to end up getting my MBA just to kind of stay in
Hmm.
school because I was good at it.
Sure.
And I was
Yeah.
like, I think this will be useful for whatever I end up doing.
Sure.
And then I went on to law school with the same
Hmm.
mentality. It was still the same. Well, what's the next best job that I can get? And to me, it's
Hmm.
like, okay, I'm not going to be a doctor. I
Hmm.
guess I'm going to be a lawyer. So I did
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
Actually did really well in school, law school, and got a big law firm job out of there, and kind of went down
Hmm.
that pathway. And I think that's when, not that I didn't have the entrepreneur in me before, I think I've always had it, but I
Hmm.
started kind of looking around and I was exposed to business people, exposed to real estate investors, seeing what they were
Hmm.
doing, representing them as clients. And that's when the light bulb really went on. And I started thinking, okay, I don't want to be a vendor. I don't want to be necessarily an attorney. Not that I didn't like it, but what I want to
Hmm.
do is own equity in these. I want to own these
Hmm.
properties. I want to
Hmm.
run this business.
Hmm.
And that was kind of when the light bulb went on, and I started
Love
exploring
that.
those avenues. Yeah.
So just briefly, what was it that drew you to becoming a doctor at the time? It sounds like you did well at school, so you just thought you should get a high paying job. That maybe those are my words, but
Yeah.
um, why did you initially go down the doctor path?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a combination of money, potential,
Hmm.
and achievement. It was just kind of, to me, it's like,
Hmm.
I didn't have necessarily a passion for anything when I was younger. So it's like, okay,
Sure.
well, okay, what's the best pathway then?
Sure.
And to me, it was just to become a doctor. I think
Yeah.
a combination of money and just, prestige and achievement, that sort of thing.
No, it makes sense, and it's easy for us to sit here and look back and say, "Why did you make that decision, Seth?" And it's I
Yeah.
didn't know what I was going to do it even after college. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny
um,
when you're like 18 to 22 years old and you're supposed to decide what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It's like,
sure,
I'm just
absolutely.
chasing girls and trying to live,
Right.
trying to live
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah. No, if my kids will listen to me, I'll tell them, just get a business degree or something if you're, if
Yeah.
college even makes sense, to be honest. But um people change careers so often these days anyway. It doesn't make a lot of sense to lock in at that young age. But okay, so then you pivot, go to law school, and then, or you get your MBA, and then you go to law school. Is that right?
Yep.
Got it. And you do well in law school, and then you get an attorney role. So how did that go?
Yeah, I mean, it went well. I mean, once I got into a big law firm, my idea was just to kind of go down that traditional path and become partner, bill
Hmm.
whatever hours, do whatever you got to do,
Hmm.
bring in clients, kind of go down that traditional pathway and just become a partner, whatever it takes.
Sure.
But along the way though, I started investing in real estate. I mean, basically the first paycheck I got started going towards a mortgage payment on a duplex that my wife and I
Mm.
bought and house hacked into. We lived in one half,
Nice.
house hacked the other half, and that was kind of our first rental property. Still own that today,
It's
and
such a powerful way to get into real estate investing. It's fantastic.
absolutely, it's basically free. I mean,
Yeah.
you put 3.5-5% down at the most because it's owner occupied,
Hmm.
and then hopefully, the other unit or units pay
Hmm.
your mortgage and pay your other expenses, and you're living there for free. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Um,
Absolutely. No, I used to
yeah,
always listen to the Bigger Pockets podcast, and some things I don't necessarily now buy into as much as I used to, but that is one thing that they used to promote that I still think is, if you can do it, such a fantastic way to really launch your real estate investing career, if you will.
the best way. If you're young and you've got flexibility in where you live and what you're willing to
Hmm.
do. I mean, house hack into one, live in it for a year or two, house hack into the next one, and do that for
Hmm.
five years, and now you've got 5 cash flowing properties, and that's a pretty dang good start to your
Absolutely.
career. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then time is on your side as
Yeah.
well, which is awesome. So, okay, so how did your career go at the big law firm?
Yeah, I mean, it went pretty well. While my head was kind of still in the game,
Hmm.
as far as having to bill 1,000,000 hours, and you've got 1,000,000 bosses. Like basically everybody that's got one more of experience over you at a big law firm is your boss. I mean,
Mm. Hmm.
in one way or another. So it's kind of a ridiculous thing that they have set up, but it's it. I did learn some lessons while I was going through it. Got
Hmm.
tons of good experience for sure. But one was I really started seeing kind of the senior partners, the managing partners, the
Hmm.
guys that really quote unquote made it.
Yeah.
Um, they're still, they're in their 60s,
Hmm.
some in their 70s, and they're still like in the office. And I'm just like, what are these guys doing here? I mean, they're making
Yeah.
over $1,000,000 a year, and they have been
Hmm.
for a long time, more
Sure.
than likely. And it's like, all right, well, you've made it. Like you've made your
Yeah.
money, you've
Like,
done what
walk
you
away.
needed to do. Like, what are you still doing here? And they're like,
Sure.
they're just hanging out at the office, not hanging out, they're billing hours, but they were like,
Yeah.
they're not in a hurry, let's say, to get home. And I
Mhm.
think whenever you get to that level of success in a law firm, for the most part, it's really hard to keep up your kind of your social responsibilities with your
Mm.
family and your friends, and kind of keeping
Mhm.
balance, quote unquote, with the other things. And you end up being really good at it. You end up being really good at being a lawyer, I think. So I think you get kind of a good
Mm.
feeling from it, but
Sure.
then it just becomes your life. And I just saw that as, if this is success, if I stick with this, then I don't
Yeah.
want it. And that was
Sure.
kind of the first pivotal moment where I'm like, I saw what success looked like if I continued down this path, and it wasn't something that I desired any longer. So that was the first thing. And the second thing was, the second pivotal moment for me in a law firm was
Mm.
really these clients that we're closing all these deals for. They're regular people. They're taking down 10 million, 20 million, $50 million properties, and they're just
Mm.
regular guys, right? Like they're not these, I don't know, crazy like real estate moguls or whatever
Mhm.
you kind of envision when you're growing up these people to be. They're just regular
Sure.
people. And that's when that mindset started to change a little bit. I started thinking I can do this. And then I started investing in bigger and bigger properties passively into syndications, and
Mhm.
then kind of working my way to the active side as
Mm.
well.
That's awesome. So yeah, basically it sounds like you were able to watch and witness firsthand what you didn't want to become, and then what presented the other option of what you might want to become, or
Yeah.
you saw basically what you didn't want to do and what you did want to do from that same position at the law firm, it sounds like.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
actually haven't heard anybody frame it that way, but that's right. That's exactly what that is. That's awesome.
Yeah, you have to update your bio sheet,
For
with,
sure.
make sure you quote me on there. No, I'm kidding.
Got it.
uh no, that's yeah. Hey, the host can have, we can have revelations, both of us on this show.
There we
um
go.
so okay, so now how did that, what was your next phase? How did that part of your career end?
Yeah, so I just kind of continued along that pathway and got more and more interested in, growing the real estate business, getting involved on deals. My wife and I actually own two gyms right now as well. So we started that business, and I got unceremoniously shown the door,
Hmm.
involuntarily, we'll say. Um, because of my mind just wasn't there, right? Like my heart
Hmm.
wasn't in the job anymore. I
Hmm.
wasn't focused on billing 2,500 hours a year anymore. My mind was on real estate, my own real
Hmm.
estate, not my clients' real estate. My mind was
Sure.
on running, businesses and becoming financially free and eventually
Hmm.
leaving this job. So it
Yeah.
just, my mind wasn't there anymore. And in looking back now, of course, at the time I was taken back and I was like mad and,
Yeah,
sad and whatever else.
ego
But
takes a big hit. It's a big
for
ego hit.
sure.
Yeah.
And, now looking back, I'm like, yeah, I probably deserve that,
Yeah,
like,
I can relate a little bit. I worked for the federal government for actually 14 years for the Department of Defense after I was in the military. And for the second half of that 14 years, so the final 7 years, up until last March, I was building my businesses and working part-time still with the, so probably 3-4 years in, it was like, now granted, it's a lot easier to keep your federal government job than it is your attorney job, but I just wasn't there. It just, my
yeah,
mind was not there. I was not there at all. And I don't, yeah, I wasn't the best employee at that point, toward the
right.
end there. So um it became very clear to me that I needed to quit. So that's what I did. But anyway, I know exactly what you're saying, as far as just your focus isn't there, and you're focused on, honestly, on bigger and better things as far as I'm concerned. So in taking ownership of your situation, taking control of your financial future. So after your bruised ego, healed up a little bit, how did things progress from the entrepreneurial side or investing side?
Yeah, I mean, it was, that was kind of an abrupt end to that chapter, but it was still lingering, I would say, like, obviously a big hit to the ego, and initial reaction was a little bit of panic. It was like, oh no, what do I do now? Like, I need to replace this income immediately. Started getting on like LinkedIn and applying to more jobs, and just all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff that you
Well, do
have
you
to
mind?
do.
I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm
Oh,
just
you're good.
curious. You don't have to get too specific. It's obviously whatever you're comfortable with, but just context. I mean, how much does an attorney at that position make approximately, and then all of a sudden it's zero?
Yeah, I mean, pushing like 250 grand a year. I mean, easily,
It's good.
just really,
It's
yeah.
good money.
Yeah, I was making maybe around 250 a year salary, without that. That doesn't even include like annual bonuses or anything like that.
Bonuses. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Gotcha.
it's really, really good money. But
Yeah.
you're working for that money, and it's a high stress environment.
Sure.
And your days are numbered if you don't produce. So
Hmm.
but yeah, I mean, it's a big drop, right? You go
Yeah.
from that to zero,
Nothing.
or whatever kind of little income that I had from the real estate and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
It wasn't little, but it was little compared to that.
Yeah.
Once I kind of caught my breath and said, you know what, this is kind of an opportunity rather than
Mm.
a failure. It's a time to say, okay, well, this is what you want to do, so let's try to make this work.
Sure.
So it was gradual, and then I took some contract work, like but never like full time anymore. Started my own law firm, took on a couple clients here and there, and then really started focusing on building the real estate business.
Hmm. Love that. And again, we're not saying overnight you got over the ego blow, and you were, in this fantastic positive mindset the next day. We're not saying that, but what came to mind when you were just talking about that was the fact that you already had practice at with the racism, you had practice at not pulling that victim card. So that's my, maybe I'm,
Yeah.
overanalyzing here, but at some point it doesn't serve you to say, why was I fired?
Right.
Why am I the victim here? And so you exercise that muscle again, I guess, and took the bull by the horns and started to really, well, talk about it. What did you do after that? I know you've built quite an impressive portfolio and business. So talk about that.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what you just said there. I mean, yeah, it's really easy to get mad at the people that fired you, right? Or the
Sure.
people that, you think did something to you. It's easy. You're like, okay, because then you don't have to deal with it internally. You say, well, that was
Mm-hmm.
an external factor that I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
control. It's their fault. They should have, given me a second or third or fourth or fifth chance. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why did they do that? They wouldn't have done it to Susie down the hall, but they did it to me. Like you
Mm-hmm.
just start thinking like that. That's the wrong way to think, because again, it's not going to get you anywhere. Like that's
Sure.
not going to help you. You can blame
It's
it
a
on
great
them all
point.
you want, and then you don't have to deal with it. I guess that's a positive for some people, but it's not going
Mm-hmm.
to help you in the long run kind of grow from it and get better as a person.
I love that. It's really, really good take. So how long did it take you to kind of start really taking action and building your own thing?
Yeah, I mean, it took some time. It's not overnight. I mean, I had already started investing, I started investing in real estate in 2013. So it was way after that.
Mm-hmm.
But it was mostly like single family, fix and flips, like, those sorts of things. And then started investing passively in syndications.
Mm-hmm.
And then working my way to the active side. Working my way to the active side, I started thinking, okay, started looking at, listening to podcasts, reading books, like
Mm-hmm.
how do I get involved? Um, Initially I wanted to get all the way away from legal. So I didn't want to do any more legal work. I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
well, how do I get involved? And started looking at, okay, well, I can probably raise some capital. I've got a pretty good network. I can get involved
Mm-hmm.
in that way, and then kind of get involved in the operations and kind of learn that and maybe start sourcing deals. Really slow. Not as fast as I thought I'd be able to build it. I thought maybe I'd be a better capital raiser than I actually am.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just slow. I was only able to do, a deal here or there. And then eventually I was like, this isn't gonna work. Like it's just not scaling as quickly as I wanted to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to do some self-reflection and just started thinking, well, what's your highest and best use, especially
Mm-hmm.
to a syndicator? And that's what I used to do is putting together the deal. Like it's the deal
Mm-hmm.
structuring, it's like teaching people how to raise capital legally. It's putting the fund and the syndication together.
Mm-hmm.
Those things that I had already done for a million different people as an attorney, they need that. So
Sure.
I I started kind of going back to that legal side, and that's how I started partnering with people on deals. I started raising capital, doing the legal
Mm-hmm.
underwriting, assisting them with deal structuring after the fact, like, any kind of transfers and all that sort of stuff. It's a big value add to a team, especially when you
Sure.
have somebody internally acting as sort of an in-house counsel role rather than an outside counsel role who might need to bill hours to get paid and those sorts of things. There's different kind of factors that come into play. And that's when I
Mm-hmm.
really got some traction. So even like last year, I was a GP on 14 deals.
Mm-hmm.
So we really got some traction last year
That's a lot.
and even towards the end of the year before that. But this year, a little bit slower. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
putting some funds together for people. I'm working on some startups. But I think that's kind of the beautiful thing about where I'm at right now. It's kind of having that freedom, that flexibility to take on the work that I want to and need to and but not have to.
Sure. I mean, with your background, you've clearly shown you have versatility and flexibility and multiple different types of skill sets. Um, so when you did your last year, 2022, approximately what percentage of time were you doing like the GP thing versus the lawyer thing? I know there's a lot of crossover, but
A lot of
you know,
crossover, but I mean, as far as just doing legal work, I didn't do any. I wasn't taking on any
mm,
legal work last year at all. I took on zero. I got asked to do it. I said no. I don't have time because we had so many deals going
mm,
on. So zero.
gotcha. Okay. No, that's I didn't expect zero. So,
Yeah,
but now this year, things have slowed down due to, I would guess, market conditions and
yeah,
the economy is a little bit different now than it was 12
yeah.
months ago. So you're opened up a little bit more to legal work, right?
Yeah, opened up a little bit more to legal work as far as forming some funds for people, teaching people how to structure these things and how to raise capital the legal way, that sorts of thing. I think it's really important right now to educate people on how to raise capital the right way, because a lot of people don't even realize that, you know, they're doing something wrong, which is crazy to think about. But you've got to, you know, people need to know how to do this, because over the last, let's say, 12 years or so, the market's been incredible. We've been on a bull run in real estate. Anybody that started a syndication or bought a multifamily property and ran it okay
Yeah,
probably did pretty well for their investors.
sure.
And so they're not getting sued. They're not getting you know, whispers from the SEC. Like, you're just not running into those problems because you've got happy investors. But you're seeing this year, you know, there's capital calls, there's people not happy
Hmm.
with, you know, the returns not coming to them.
Hmm.
So you're going to see, hopefully not, hopefully the economy will change and we won't see all this. But
Sure.
if it continues, you might
Hmm.
see the SEC kind of fishing around and doing some more investigations and trying to figure out, you know, was capital raised the right way? Did they claim the right exemption? Like, were all these things done correctly? Because if they were not, then, you know, there's going to be some consequences to the capital raisers and to the sponsors that have put these deals together in a not so compliant way.
Now, what have you learned from just speaking about capital raising, either from, you know, from any of your experience, any part of your history? What have you learned? What are some lessons about effective capital raising? Because I do capital raising, and it's not necessarily easy.
Yeah.
And so, what are some tricks or tips you could give to somebody out there? You know, assuming they're doing it in a legal fashion, how do you raise capital? What are some pointers?
Well, I mean, as an attorney, like, the first thing I do is make sure they understand kind of what those rails look like, what those guidelines look like.
Sure.
And usually the first thing I say that messes people up is you can't raise capital and only raise capital and get paid to do it. And that's it. And people are like, wait, what if I'm the GP, or what if I'm this or that? And it's like, well,
Hmm.
yeah, if you're the GP, but as long as you're doing other stuff, as long as you're acting like a GP, as long as you're underwriting
Hmm.
and managing the asset and attending meetings and doing all the
Hmm.
other things that GPs should be doing, that's
Hmm.
fine. But most quote unquote, you know, capital raisers that are just partnering with the real lead sponsors, a lot of
Hmm.
times, yeah, they're a name general partner, but they're just raising capital. And
Hmm.
a lot of times they're just getting paid based on how much they raise, which makes it
Hmm.
even worse. It happens all the time. I see it every single day. So
Hmm.
I think that first step really is to learn and to educate yourself as
Hmm.
far as what you can and cannot do, and then start building your business off of that. Like, what do I
Sure.
need to do to stay legally compliant? And then that's when you can get into the more fun stuff, as far as like
Hmm.
marketing and starting a podcast and, you
Yeah.
know, having those investor calls. Like, that stuff is all after you actually know, like, the rules of the game. You have to know the
Sure.
rules of the game before you start playing it.
No, that's a great way to put it. So once you've established those guardrails and the rules of the game, then what? I know you have your podcast, and has that been a key factor in your ability to raise capital?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I think you have to have a platform that can be that can be a podcast, it could be a YouTube channel, it could be just going on other people's podcasts. It could just be a Twitter feed if you're really good at that. I mean, you've
Hmm.
got to have some sort of forum, some sort of platform to where you can
Yeah.
reach strangers. You know, the first time you raise capital, it can be from friends and family, and you might have a successful raise. And then maybe, depending on your current network, of course,
Hmm.
it could continue to go well. But at some point, you're going to run out of people that you just know, and you're
Hmm.
going to have to go out to strangers, and you've got to have a continual pipeline of new investors if you're going to do
Sure.
this for a living. So in order to do that, either you get really good at networking and really
Hmm.
good at what you do, which can happen, and then you just
Sure.
get referral based people coming into
Hmm.
your pipeline, or you do that plus you have some sort of a platform. And, you know, again, if you're not interested in starting your own podcast, which is a lot of work, you know
It
that.
is a lot. It is a lot of work.
Yeah, you can just go on
Yeah.
other people's podcasts. Like,
Yeah.
start to think about like what your message is, what will serve you, as well as educate the audience, and
Sure.
start reaching out to people and get on other people's podcasts, because that's probably, you know, that's a lot easier than running your own.
Absolutely. It is a lot of work. That's for sure.
and
But
I would say,
I
I would
love it.
add on to that, like, do it with a purpose, right? Like, some people just, like, when you first start out, you're just happy to be on a podcast. And then
Yeah.
eventually, sooner rather than later, you got to figure out, okay, well, if I'm going to put an hour into this show, what am I
Yeah.
going to talk about? Why am I talking about it? Like, how does it serve my business? Just so you can you have a purpose. And a lot of times it might just be as simple as creating a lead magnet so you can get leads into your
Mhm.
funnels and start that email relationship with people, and eventually, get them on a call, talk to them about their investments, and then send them a deal.
Yeah,
So you just kind of got to get all that laid out.
absolutely. No, I think we haven't talked much on my show about starting a podcast,
Yeah.
running a podcast. Um, but I heard something like 15% of the 4+ million shows that are out there actually have produced content in the an episode in the last 60 days, something like that. So most people quit. They start a podcast and
Oh
they
yeah.
quit, or they just let it die. So speaking to what you just said, you need to know your why behind the podcast as well. So um, makes a lot of sense. So from a business standpoint, because let's be honest, most attorneys maybe aren't the best at running a business. And I know
True.
it's not just the real estate. I know you have the 2 gyms with your wife, like you mentioned. Um, what surprises have you dealt with as far as becoming an entrepreneur, running your own business, multiple businesses? What's challenged you more than you expected?
Just so as an attorney, you're kind of trained to assess risk and figure out where that risk comes from and try to mitigate that as much as possible. And that's,
Hmm.
that's always a good strategy. But when that happens, you also become very conservative, right? Like, you're very
Hmm.
risk averse,
Sure.
you're conservative, you don't necessarily want to take risks, and especially for your clients. So it's the right way to be as an attorney. But as you
Sure.
kind of venture out into the business world, and now I'm kind of in the startup world, there's a lot
Yeah.
of risk. There's tons of risk, and it's almost championed to be able to be a risk taker
Mm.
as an entrepreneur. It's something you have to deal with. You have to every single day. Just you have to deal with risk, whether it's spending time on something that might turn into nothing, or risk as far as, yeah. I think the biggest thing is okay, I'm putting
Hmm.
all this time and effort and money, but is it gonna pan out? I don't
Hmm.
know. It's like
Yeah. Yeah.
there's just an appetite for risk that you have to have in entrepreneurship that you might not have to have if you're in a W-2.
No, it's definitely true. And when I run something past an attorney, if they don't come back with some kind of issue, then I'm like, what am I paying you for? So I mean, that's their job, right? Is to point out risk and point out potential issues. Same thing with like a house inspector, home inspector. If they don't list out all these things that are wrong with the house you're going to buy, well, then what are they doing? So, but my point is that if you want to buy that house, there's always going to be something that could go wrong with it. Um, so yeah, that's got to be tough, being the kind of wearing both both hats at the same time,
Yeah.
as far as just kind of compartmentalizing, I guess, in a way, your attorney risk averse approach versus, no, I'm a business owner, I'm a founder, I got it, let's go for this. Anything else to add to that?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you've got to, again, I think it's still good practice. You have to know the risks. You have to assess the risks in an honest way. But at that point, it doesn't just stop. It doesn't just stop there and you say, oh, this is risky, quote unquote. This is risky, quote unquote, and now I've got to stop what I'm doing. You've got to go forward and figure out, well, if I want to continue on, what are the solutions? Like, how can I mitigate this risk by solving this problem or changing my plan so that I can move forward with the business plan and close this deal or launch this product or continue this raise?
Yeah. All right, Seth. So as we start to wrap up here before we get to our rapid fire questions, um, we've talked a good bit about some of the adversity that you've overcome. Let's talk about abundance, what that means to you, and what that looks like in your life today.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about abundance, I think about freedom. Like, I think some people translate abundance to money, but to me, even money represents freedom, freedom of time, freedom of who you want to spend your time with. I mean, it really comes down to time, right? Like people break down the freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of location, but I think it really comes down to time and the flexibility that you have. We were chatting before the podcast. It's like, I work more now probably as an entrepreneur than I ever did, even billing 2,500 hours a year as an attorney. But it's totally different. It's not as heavy because I know
Sure.
I'm working towards my goals. I'm working for myself.
Yeah.
I'm doing what I want to do, rather than somebody else telling me what to do. It's just a totally different thing. And when you evolve your businesses to the way that you want them to be, then it doesn't really feel like work anymore. So, I mean,
Yeah.
for me, it's the overcoming the adversity to abundance was just taking that accountability and turning that into my own businesses and how I handle things myself, and being able to translate that to this abundance, which for me is flexibility of time.
Got it. That's a great answer. Awesome. So I've got some rapid fire questions for you. You ready?
Ready, man.
All right. What is one thing that people misunderstand about you, Seth?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think that I care. That sounds kind of weird, but like I think that I come off a little bit aloof or stoic. Sometimes it's a little unemotional, but it's just kind of how I've trained myself to be. But I am thinking, I am caring, I am listening. It's just
Yeah.
a lot of times as an entrepreneur with a ton of different businesses, a lot of different moving parts,
Yeah.
I tend to not let things affect me on the
Yeah.
exterior.
I'm chuckling because I can relate. So
Yeah.
What's one of your biggest failures or regrets looking back at your life so far, professional career, something you'd like to do over?
Yeah, I mean, I don't like that because I think we've always, we become the people that we're supposed to become, and we've become
Sure.
that person because of the things that we went through.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I had to put it on anything, med school was definitely a mistake.
Mm. Just
I mean, I
going
didn't.
to med school. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't for me. I did it for the money, the prestige, really like all the wrong reasons, right? And it doesn't serve me now. Being an attorney at a big law firm,
Yeah.
my law degree, like my MBA, like all that stuff serves me still today.
Sure.
The medical stuff,
Hmm.
it's so unrelated to what I do now that it really doesn't serve me any longer.
Doesn't help you with the gyms and the fitness stuff at all?
It's so far in the past, man. It's
Gotcha. Um, if you could go back and give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would it be?
Get help, get a coach, get a mentor, to help you even work through the idea. Because I always wondered, like, I always questioned, like, what do I want to do? Like, I knew that being a doctor wasn't necessarily it. It was just the best thing at the time. So I think if I would have been more open to finding a mentor or a coach or somebody that can kind of work through those questions that I had, I might
Sure.
have gotten the right direction sooner.
That's a good answer. I can relate to that one too. If you were
Yeah.
given $10 million tomorrow, what would you do with it?
I would put it in passive income vehicles for sure. Something with hard assets, real estate, because I know real estate. The only time I've ever gotten in trouble with investing is when I invest in something I don't know. I've noticed that pattern.
Sure.
Is when I get involved with something I don't understand and it's just kind of that shiny object. I've learned that lesson, and now I know what I know and love, and that's real estate. So it's either real estate or it's real estate related. So if I had 10 million bucks, passive income vehicles for sure in real estate.
Got it. Awesome. What is a challenge that you're facing right now in your business life?
Yeah, so like this year my business has changed a little bit to where I'm taking on these kind of leadership executive roles with startups. I'm involved with 3 right now, so it's really kind of stretching my mind as far as, again, going from attorney to the attorney mindset to like an entrepreneurial mindset to now like a startup entrepreneur mindset, totally different, because we're talking about kind of these, when we're looking at a real estate asset, it's like, okay, we know what the rent is now, we know where we think we can get to the rent to, we know what the expenses are going to be, and then we can build a pro forma projections based on that. when we're
Sure.
dealing with startups, it's like we
Yeah.
might have this product, or we have this idea that we're going to turn into a product, which we haven't done yet. And we think that we're going to hire these 10 people and raise this much money and sell this many of those things in this amount of time. It's just so
Hmm.
speculative in my mind, because I'm used to dealing
Sure.
with hard assets, that it's kind of wrapping my head around that. But I do love the excitement of it. I love the
Hmm.
idea of, like, 100x multiples and
Hmm.
crazy things like that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. You can certainly lose money in real estate, but you've done so many deals now. It's essentially the same thing over and over with different variables, but yeah, startups, that's a whole different world. What types of startups are you involved with, if you can talk about it?
Yeah, one is Clavis Technologies. So it's
Okay.
actually eventually it's going to be an end-to-end residential real estate transaction platform.
Mm.
But for now, we're really working with working on an automated system that will replace a transaction coordinator.
Mm.
That's really the idea, right? So transaction coordinator kind of they send papers from one person to the next and get these
Hmm.
signatures and then a document repository and all these different things that can be done electronically. And
Sure.
we've been able to find a way to build an AI based
Mm.
program that learns and communicates with all the different parties. And we're ready to go to private beta here in the
Mm.
next week.
Wow, that's awesome. I don't know how the getting everything dealing with the townships doing recording, that's a different challenge, but
Yeah, and I should definitely mention another one, which is I'm
yeah.
working with TribeVest, who is not it
Yeah.
is a startup, but they've been in business for a while now. But this probably resonate with your audience, because
Yeah.
we talked about kind of raising capital and the
Hmm.
SEC issues that come up whenever you raise capital the wrong way, right? So
Sure.
people tend to use this co-GP model where you've got these capital raisers that come in, they raise capital and they don't do anything else. Well, guess what? That's illegal. You're not supposed to do that. But
Hmm.
it's cheap. It's a cheap way to do it. The better
Hmm.
way to do it is a fund to funds model,
Hmm.
where this capital raiser has their own fund that they raise capital for, and then they come into that target company or that lead sponsor's deal as a limited partner. The problem with that model is it's expensive, right? Because then you've
Hmm.
got this top level lead sponsor that's putting together a
Hmm.
syndication, and then you've got each fund manager that has their own fund that
Hmm.
has it's another syndication. So,
Sure.
if you got 5 capital raisers, that's 5 + 1 funds. It's expensive. So
Sure.
we're working on a product to make it much, much less expensive and really automate the process in the meantime, because you probably know as well as any, with all the interviews
Hmm.
you've done, that this is the way that it's going, right? Like trying to figure out where the expensive bottlenecks are and where
Hmm.
technology can replace it. There's the companies out there already, like, that are doing this in the startup world, like Carta, like AngelList, places like that are automating
Hmm.
securities documentation and the raising capital process, and we're taking that to the real estate world.
Hmm. And that you're doing that with TribeVest, right?
Yes.
Got it. That's awesome. Um, Fantastic. How about, I don't know if we've talked about any books. Do you have a book or two that you could recommend for my audience?
Right now, because this is a little bit outside of what I typically read, but The Lean Startup by
Mm.
Eric Ries.
Hmm.
Um, it is about startups and how to test a product and taking it to kind of like that Series A funding round, which
Hmm.
sounds a little bit crazy for people that are doing real estate or something else. But
Hmm.
there's so many great concepts that you can take from that, as far as kind of production over perfection and just kind of putting together
Hmm.
that MVP, that minimal viable product, and just getting
Right.
it out there and test it and then tweak it and then put it back out there and then tweak it and test it and tweak it and test it till you get something that everybody wants and there's a demand for, rather than
Hmm.
just getting this product perfect, putting it out there, and then nobody wants it. Like
Mm.
there's a lot of lessons to be learned there.
Sure. Love it. Now, as we wrap up, I know we're short on time here. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, who wants to raise capital and wants to contact you to talk about putting together fund or syndication documents, what does that process look like?
Yeah. So I have all of my links and things in the same place. You can go to
Yeah.
SethPaulBradley.com. That's probably the best place to start. And then all my contact info is there as well. So you can just reach out to me via email is probably the best way to get started. And you can find me on all social media platforms as well.
Awesome. Well, Seth, this has been fantastic. Is there anything that you want to cover real quick before we hop out of here?
That's it, brother. I think we covered everything.
That's awesome. Well, Seth Bradley, we really appreciate you taking your time to stop by and share some wisdom with us. And thanks a lot. It's been awesome.
Hi, Jamie. Appreciate it, man.
And to the listener out there, thank you for spending your most valuable resource with us, and that is your time. Thanks, everyone. Take care.